and people like it. And that's, a great honor for me to know that someone likes the show. So if you ever see me out somewhere and you just want to say hello, I'm open to that. I welcome that. I thank you for that. It is greatly appreciated, and I'm honored that people enjoy the show. And it's kind of grown bigger than I ever thought it could, and at a rate much faster than I thought would have ever happened, period. So all those people that said hello, or all the people that wanted to even say hello, I appreciate the kind thoughts. I appreciate the emails and all the positive feedback that everyone's giving me about the show. It is my greatest honor for someone to come up to me and tell me that they've always been kind of mystified or scared of investments or finance, and I'm explaining it in a way that is clear and easy to understand for them. I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing that's different than other people, but it sure seems different to a lot of people. So again, if that helps, I'm honored and thank you for saying hello. So I'm going to do enough of that, and I want to do a quick talk about something I learned about Edward Jones to kind of follow up on our last week's show. This is Phil Ferguson with Polaris Financial Planning, the home of science-based investing. I see people owning really bad investments all of the time. Many advisors are paid a commission by a big company to sell you something you may not need. It's kind of like church. They create fear, then they tell you what you want to hear, and then they take your money. What you want is an advisor that is paid only by you. That is a fee-only fiduciary advisor. Remember, people work for who they are paid by. You can contact me, Phil, at PolarisFinancialPlanning.com, or listen to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Each show, we have an interesting investing skeptically topic and an interview with someone fighting to end religion. Polaris also gives 10% of gross revenue to support the growing secular movement. You're not just getting better investments, you're helping to change the world.
Here's an excerpt from Nailed by David Fitzgerald.
Didn't there have to have been a Jesus? Perhaps he was just a wandering teacher or an exorcist, an apocalyptic prophet or a zealot who opposed the Romans. Perhaps he was all these things, or even a composite of several such early first-century figures. But at any rate, surely there had to be somebody at the original core of Christianity, arguably the most famous individual in human history. All this seems to be a perfectly reasonable, completely natural assumption to make, so why would anyone be so foolish as to propose that Jesus never existed? Doesn't it just make more sense to assume that there was a historical Jesus, even if we're unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? As it turns out, no. The opposite is true. The closer we look at the evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find, and the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity. And once you begin to parse out the origins of this tradition or that teaching from their various sources, the sweater begins unraveling quickly until it becomes very difficult to buy that there ever was, or even could have been, any historical figure at the center.
Nailed by David Fitzgerald is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
A regular listener to the show ran into me at the day after conference, I guess, the mini-con, which on Sunday, which, by the way, ironically, was virtually sold out, and the room was packed. It was very hard to find a seat to sit in. So that was a very nice opposition to the previous day where it looked like we had too much space. But this person came up to me, and we started talking, and this person will know who he or she is by the story I'm going to tell. So, again, it falls into the category of someone that listens to the show and told me they like it. And, of course, I'm honored. But they had heard a lot about my show and learned a lot of things from the show and started thinking maybe they should do something on their own or hire me or hire a different advisor, and not the advisor that they happen to have through chance at Edward Jones. And it just so happened that this last weekend, my show previously was on Edward Jones, and they happened to talk to their advisor, and the advisor said, no, I am not a fiduciary, but when the law goes into effect, if it does go into effect, they will become a fiduciary for their retirement accounts. So we've talked about this before, but you may not know that the pending fiduciary law, if it stays in place, doesn't take place until spring or even the middle of 2017, and it does not affect non-retirement accounts. So if you just have a brokerage account, it doesn't affect that. So they can still be not a fiduciary. So they can be a fiduciary. See, I can't say that word right. I don't know what it is. They can be a fiduciary on some accounts and not on other accounts. Well, what the fuck is that? And why would they want to do that? They want to do that for a specific reason. So they will follow the law where they have to, but then they'll still screw you where they can. It's unbelievable. And by definition, this will cause a conflict because the advisor now may be tempted to tell you, you know what, putting money in an IRA or a Roth IRA is not such a good idea, simply because if you keep the money in a taxable account, they can sell you some bullshit with really high expenses and really high commissions that they get kickbacks for. So they're still conflicted. They only have to be a fiduciary once your money is in the IRA or Roth IRA, assuming the law even stays. And if Trump gets elected, you can kiss that shit goodbye. But anyway, so that's one thing. And the advisor said, well, when that happens, what we'll do is we'll take all of your money out of A shares and move them to C shares. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. There is no law or real rule that anyone has to follow, but the industry does have a pretty regular pattern that A shares, and what I mean by A shares, these are loaded mutual funds. And if you look at the name, so if you get your statement, and you probably got one a few weeks ago from the end of May, or you got one from the end of March, or you'll get one soon after this show at the end of June. Look at your statement, and you can look at the name of the fund, and it says the Big Stock Fund A. It'll have a letter just hanging out there at the end. If you have any kind of letter out there, it's almost always a loaded fund, a load fund, where you're paying an extra fee of some kind. I can't complain about the advisor getting paid because I get paid, so that would be, what do we call that, conflict of interest or hypocritical of me. But what bugs me is that you don't know how much they get paid and that they have these conflicts and different items can pay them different rates. But the idea that when they're suddenly compelled by law to act like a fiduciary, what they're going to do is take your A shares and switch them to C shares is laughably, hysterically bad. So in A shares, one argument they could make is that you pay 3, 5, up to 8.5% by law front-end load. A shares mean front-end load. So you pay that load, and now you're in, and you have lower expense ratio for that specific fund that you might pay as a B or a C share. Still, it's going to be materially higher than what you would pay in an index fund. So if the average mutual fund is 1.5 to 1.6% as a published expense ratio, which, by the way, does not account for all of the expenses that you are going to pay, those are only the ones that they have to list in that category. So the A shares might have slightly lower, so they might be 0.7 to 0.9 to 1.2%. But you pay 3, 5, 6, 8.5% up front. And now this person who got a kickback from American Funds or some other fund company to convince you to buy something because they got paid a big commission is now going to switch you from A shares to C shares, which have the highest expense ratio. So what they're going to do is they got the money up front in the A shares, and now they think that because they have to be a fiduciary, they're going to switch you to C shares and make a higher ongoing fee, so that they'll be now on a fee, ongoing fee structure, which I do support as a concept, but they're not acting like a fiduciary at all. Well, why are they going to stick with the same shares that they sold you, or the same funds that they sold you when they were getting a kickback, when they were getting paid a commission? They've not fixed anything. If anything, if they do this method, so if you have an advisor that says, oh, because of the new upcoming law, I've got to switch you from A shares to C shares, fire them on the fucking spot. You already paid all of the front end load, and now they want you to pay up to 1% more on an ongoing basis on mediocre funds that you probably shouldn't be in the first place. It is laughably ridiculous if this is what the industry's answer is, if this is what they consider to be a fiduciary behavior. They're wrong. Now, whether they get sued or they get away with it, maybe they just end up making more money and they slap the word on it because people just don't know the difference. There's no program to educate individual investors on what it means to be a fiduciary. So if your advisor tells you you're going to go from A shares to C shares, no, stick with the A and just fire the advisor. Or manage it yourself. Read some books. Go online. If you're not in the mood for doing that, and I know it's not for everybody, a shameless self-promotional plug, it is my show anyway, so I can do whatever the fuck I want. You can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. But don't let them move you from A shares to C shares under the guise that they are now going to be doing something that's in your best interest. If they were going to do something in your best interest, they would move you to different funds that weren't the same funds that were paying them a kickback in the first place. And they would probably move you, at least my opinion, would be to index funds. But then they don't have a way to collect money from you, and they'd have to have you sign a different document to agree to pay them. And part of the magic is that you don't know that you're paying them. So the whole thing just stinks to high heaven, and if that's what Edward Jones plans to do, if this wasn't just one rogue agent telling someone that listens to my show, fine, I'll be the first to say that I misunderstood. But based on what I was told, that's a terrible idea, so don't do that. So that's just a quick follow-up on the Edward Jones that we had last week.
Here's an excerpt from The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, The Mormons, by David Fitzgerald.
Although the church does not disclose its finances, it has long been widely recognized as the wealthiest church per capita in America. Time magazine put the church's total assets at a minimum of $30 billion in 1997. In their 1999 book, Mormon America, investigative journalists Richard and Joan K. Osling conservatively estimated church assets at least $25 to $30 billion, adding it was likely well beyond that. The church criticized these numbers as excessive, but without offering any hint of what the real figures might be. The church's financial growth is fueled by sacred taxation, i.e., tithing. To be in good standing, all faithful Mormons must tithe, that is, give 10% of their gross, not net, income to the church. And it's not unheard of for Mormons to pay a double tithe. The Osling's research concluded that as of the mid-1990s, annual tithing revenue was likely between $4.25 and $5.3 billion. That's billion with a B, not an M, annually. The Oslings also found that in addition, the church also owns a surprisingly large amount of lucrative commercial investments, managed mostly through its Deseret Management Corporation. These holdings bring in another estimated $600 million annually. They include an estimated $6 billion or more in stock and bonds, several insurance companies including Beneficial Life, a company with $16 billion in insurance and assets of $1.6 billion. Media holdings including Bonneville International Corporations, which owns a chain of 25 radio stations, 7th largest in the country, a television station, and other media operations. Hawaii Reserves, which manages extensive real estate developments in Hawaii, such as the Disney-esque tourist trap, Polynesian Cultural Center, the major source of PCC's labor force, Brigham Young University, Hawaii, and more than 150 farms and ranches, including the largest cattle ranch in America, making the LDS Church one of the biggest landowners of the nation, with around 1 million acres of farm and ranch land, roughly equal to the size of the state of Delaware. Incidentally, the church's religious buildings and property, like the magnificent Salt Lake City Temple, are considered expenses and not sources of revenue. A big focus of church funds is on their humanitarian efforts. Every year, tens of millions of dollars are donated to carry out outreach activities in 178 countries, which also happened to contribute to church growth. And like many religions,